was a great crowd. Welcome to Malvern Books. We are very excited today to have Octavio Solis here. He's going to be reading from his book, Retablos. And I'm just going to give a quick introduction. Retablos, Stories from a Life Lived Along the Border, is a memoir about growing up brown at the U.S.-Mexico border. It is the first book of Octavio Solis, the author of more than 20 plays. Solis is considered one of the most prominent Latino playwrights in America. His works have been produced in theaters across the country, and he has received awards such as the NEA Playwriting Fellowship and the Kennedy Center's Roger L. Stevens Award. His fiction and short plays have appeared in such publications as Zyzzyva and Arroyo Review. He's based near Ashland, Oregon. Welcome, Octavio.
I was going to say I was so impressed that you were able to pronounce Zyzzyva, but got stuck on Arroyo. I thought that's really kind of funny. Thank you all for coming tonight. I've been on a short stint over Texas. Wow, thank you. Kind of connecting with my audiences in Texas, because in many ways this is a kind of Texas book, because Texas is along the border. And these are stories of my childhood growing up along the Rio Grande in El Paso. But they could be anywhere. These are in many ways universal stories, but made more poignant because of the situation that is going on along the border now. I didn't write it in response to that. I started writing these about maybe 8 years ago, and they came out of an impulse to do something in the absence of a play that really needed to come out. I just had writer's block. So I said, I have to write something. And then I remembered this, I got this memory of something that happened when I was in high school, and I said, well, I'll write that down. And as I wrote it down, I wrote it in the present tense, and that gave it all a kind of immediacy that made me feel like I was reliving it all over again. So that's what launched this book. I just wrote a series of them, and they eventually drew the interest of City Lights books, and the rest is, as they say, history. Anyway, this is the first one. That's called Retablos. This is me in my old room, unpacking my bags on the bed I slept in more than 30 years ago, hearing my mother titter at something on the TV while my dad is stirring the caldo de pollo on the stove. He blurts out something crude in Spanish, and now both of them are roaring big as life, filling the house with horsey laughter. Then it hits me. This is how one of them will cry when the other dies. I look out the window and I'm 13 all over again, getting ready for school. A polar front blew in all the way down from Canada and locked us in an overnight freeze, and didn't even have the manners to leave us any snow. Just a chill air and ice in the power lines. But as I come down the hall for my breakfast, I see my sister standing outside the maid's room, snarling something to herself. I ask her what happened, and she says, the birds are dead. What? The birds are dead, she says again. I look in the room, and I see the maid, this young Mexican girl of 20 we hired to watch the house and cook food for us while my parents are at work. I see her sitting on her bed with her face in her hands, sobs, and the words, perdón, perdón, are slipping through her fingers. While she wipes her snot on her sleeve, I look past her at the cage where my mom's canaries are supposed to be perched. But they're not there. I come closer and find them both balled up and lifeless on the newspaper floor of the cage. They were old, their yellow feathers faded white, inherited from my grandmother when she moved to Fresno, only now they are dead. My sister says the maid left the window open and they froze. They couldn't take the cold. She should have known. And now look at them, she says. I'm about to ask where Mom and Dad are, but then I hear them laughing in their room. Why would they be laughing? I cross the hall and open the door, which is weird because they hardly ever close the door in the morning once they're up. And there they are, sitting on the bed next to each other, hands on their brows, crying so boisterously it sounds like they're busting at the seams at some practical joke. It's unnerving. I've never seen them wailing like this, bent over and shaking, their mouths contorted, bawling like children. I've seen my mom cry a few times, but never like this, and never my dad, who's not the kind of man inclined to such displays of emotion. For a pair of old birds, no less. There's something ancient about the way their wails change them, even give the room a different light. I think this is a holy moment, and close the door and leave them to their searing, sacred laughter. That's how they come, these memories. Like a set of retablos, votive images painted on old beaten tin, marked with the mystery of being, with acts of transgression recorded for those who need to remember. That's what I'm revisiting that's what revisiting El Paso is like for me. Like walking into a retablo with a rusty surface for a sky, and misremembered family and friends for saints and supplicants, and the lost distilled moments of my border past for miracles. They come to me at the strangest times, as if to remind me that I have lived this much because of them. Oscar Villalon, who published a few of these retablos before I was even thinking about a book, asked me to write a kind of introduction to them, and I couldn't think of anything. I didn't want to write like something dry, so I said, tell another story. So I went with this story as a way to kind of introduce them. And when I wrote this, then I knew that's my concept. Think of them as retablos. They're ex voto images that are painted by naive painters for people as a kind of way to thank the divine, to thank God or the saint who saved them from an illness or from an attack, or when the pig died, or when the bus crashed or something. And always in the corner of these ex voto images is a little image of that saint or the Virgin in their robe, like a moth planted against the sky. And so I think of them as thank you notes to God, thank you notes to the divine. And I use that. I also think of them as really very early versions of flash fiction. So they make sense to me. And also give me a kind of structure. Think of them as something condensed that has everything. The story, the transgression, the imprecations, the prayer, and then finally the miracle, whatever that may be. The holy moment, the sacred moment. So that's by way of explaining what a retablo is. I'll read another one. Some of them have a kind of arc, and some of them feel more like character sketches, but they have a kind of narrative drive still. They add up to something. This one's called Consuela, and she was our maid. She took care of us. She practically raised us when we were little kids. Consuelo. Her name is Consuelo, and she is our maid, our criada. She has something in her hands, a precious object. She comes down from the mountains of Mexico and takes a long bus ride to Ciudad Juarez, then walking over the Santa Fe Bridge to El Paso, boards another bus that takes her along the curve of the lower valley to our house. She lives with us, this lady whom everyone thinks is our abuela, because like our abuela, she commands our respect and rouses our love. Setting up her meager belongings in a small room near the kitchen, her comb, her picture of San Martin giving a piece of his cloak to a mendicant, her rosary, and her small crumbling Bible, beside the single bed that used to be my little brother's. She puts on her simple country dress and her apron with homemade rick-rack. She's small and stout, with strong, bowed legs that carry her through the house she spends all day cleaning. Her face dark and furrowed, her hair silver and tightly braided into a plait that hangs down her back like a staff. Her hands rough and calloused as a man's. She cooks all our meals and calls for us when the plates are served. Wherever we are, we hear her summons and head for home. The food is so good that Gino and Marcos and the other kids want a plate too. She feeds us, feeds the dog, feeds the canaries in their cage, then feeds herself. All we know is her name, which is consolation, which is perfect, since that is what she brings to my parents, who bust their asses day and night to make ends meet, which they never do, these ends that barely pass each other across the room. She grows hierbas in the backyard and makes healing soups and teas for us when we're sick. Sometimes, when she's alone, when a lull in her daily labors permits, she sits and watches the Canal 2 on TV, the Spanish language shows. At night, after we've all had our dinners and are getting ready for bed, she goes to her room with the door closed, sits on her bed with her open Bible and prays. There are times when she goes to see her family. She says she'll be gone 2 weeks, but 2 weeks can turn into 4 and then into 8 because of difficulties at home or crossing over issues. But 6 years of Consuelo, 6 years of her quiet folk singing as she hangs our clothes on the line, her sweeping the porch with that old broom, her stern admonishments for us for disrespecting our parents. 6 years of her practically raising us invokes the deep mestizaje that lives in our blood, that reminds us that we come from something older, simpler, and richer than the privileges we think are owed to us in this land. This is a retablo of Consuelo, sitting on her bed with the door ajar, just enough for a 9-year-old to peer through. This old woman with her hair unbraided, loose all the way down to her lap, with a sacred object in the cradle of her hands. What can it be but the apple we threw away, which she retrieved, saying, "Waste nothing of God's," and took to her room, and here it is, this sunken, moldy apple, and Consuelo gingerly taking bites of it in the luminous mystery of faith. We all grew up with, the men in our house all grew up, the boys in our house all grew up wanting to be our dad, just as all sons use their father as a model for manhood. And in our house, that was no exception. And so I had this image of myself that really was almost a mirror image of my father, at a time when I really needed to be a man. So I wrote this piece to kind of commemorate those moments when I fell short of that. It's called El Mero Mero. What the hell is a man anyway? I had a clearer sense of what that whole deal meant when I was a little mocoso, when everyone was older and taller and deeper voiced than me and kept a modelo negro at arm's length. But now I'm growing some fine hair on my lip and my balls, my voice is dropping, and my flared jeans are all high waters. I'm an easy target for my buds at the schoolyard. When's the flood coming, ese? Doesn't help that over my platform shoes, I'm often wearing white tube socks. Girls are kinda not into that. Clearly, I'm missing something. But my jefe, my old man, my father, he's a man. He's got the forearms to prove it. He's modeled his squint after Charles Bronson and put spicier chile on his eggs than anyone in our house. He busts his ass slinging burgers over spitting grease 9 hours a day and doesn't ever complain about it. Then he comes home a drained man, dropping all the trappings of his day into the top drawer of his dresser before he drags himself into the shower. That's where all the talismans of manhood are kept. Right now, he's not home. My mother is snoring on the couch while the 6 o'clock news blasts out of the Magnavox. Everyone else is either out or out of sight. It's like some muse of my adolescence is saying, "Here's your chance, baboso." Peering into his drawer, I take inventory of the tokens that make Dad, Dad. His tin of pomada de la campana, some cologne in a boot-shaped bottle, shoe polish for his work Oxfords, a few ragged pesos, tangles of man bracelets, old watches and chains, random pins collected from various customers, some old keys, a pack of Camels, an engraved silver lighter, and a single copper-headed bullet. These are the trinkets of my dad's personal mythology, all jumbled together with the carelessness of a working man. Recalling how he applies the pomada on his friar greaser burns, I rub some on my hands, and I douse my neck and face with his cologne, which burns into my raw pimples. I slick my hair back with his hair cream. Then I put the cross that he keeps on a gold chain around my neck, unbuttoning my paisley shirt down to my sternum so it shows. And then try on one of his dead watches. Finally, I look at the structure of my new self in the mirror. Mero mero, the real. And mero mero slinks out of the house and goes around to that derelict field where the cotton used to grow to shoulder height. He leans against the wall by the seared clumps of tumbleweed and breathes in his newfound musk. He looks down at the cross catching the sundown light. He rattles the bracelet around his skinny wrist as he raises a cigarette to his lips and lights it with his beautiful lighter. Oh, the sound of that lighter. Suppressing a cough, he looks out toward the blue-gray silhouette of the mountains in Ciudad Juarez, where he imagines all the real men of the world are nodding their somber heads in unison at the spectacle of his arrival. And mero. A group of 3 slouchy vatos in white t-shirts and baggy khakis, old enough to drive a car but not old enough to own one, stroll down the street on their way to someplace better than where they were. El mero turns his gaze their way, and they must feel it, because one of them looks right back at him and sneers, "Que ves, puto?" El mero looks away, and that's when he hears them laughing. Not even very loud, not even with much derision, just the kind of laughing that diminishes a guy. The kind of laughing that flattens the sunset and puts it out of reach and causes all the fine hairs of a person like El Mero to wish themselves onto some other body, not his. Little flecks of shame and anger swarm over him, and he doesn't even finish the camel. El Mero knows he'll slink back inside and put his old man's bracelet and cross, his crumpled pack of cigs and silver lighter back in the drawer, and he'll wash off the pomada and cologne in the shower along with everything that makes him El Mero. Except that in the little pocket of my high water flared jeans that I'll wear for another humiliating month in a year of humiliating months, I'll keep a shiny copper-headed bullet for the day when I understand the real. This next one that I'm going to read is called Wild Kingdom, and it's one of the stories that I've actually had inside me for a long time, and I've resisted writing for so long because I told myself I can't write this until my parents are gone. Well, they're still alive. And I guess I had to write it, or else, who knows, I might die next. So I had to write it. And it turned out okay after all. It was a story that needed to be told. So it's called Wild Kingdom. He fired his gun at us, but not because he wants us dead. How could he? He's our dad. The same dad who took us to Rio Doso every summer for some fresh mountain air and got us new bikes for Christmas. The same dad who loves the Flip Wilson show and croons along to Lucha Villa on the radio. But something's collapsing inside him for sure. And lately, he's a tense, brooding man walking around the house with his hands clenched around some invisible giant rubber band. He's still our dad, though. Our Abba. We're supposed to be quiet in the afternoons because he's working 6 nights a week at this local greasy burger joint and he needs to sleep days. He's not so good when he's roused. He bellows for us to shut the hell up if we even pad down the halls too loud, and once he threw his shoe at my little brother and caught him right at the temple and almost knocked him out. So today, we figure we'll watch some TV with the volume low. We're all sitting around watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Well, my mom's not happy about something. She's all knotted up and tight-lipped, chewing on a fingernail while the jackals nip at the wildebeest carcass. She suddenly charges into the room where he's sprawled on the bed and snarls something nasty about him coming home later than he's supposed to and smelling of drink on top of it, and he mutters something back, which results in Amma slamming the door and marching to the kitchen where she proceeds to wash the dishes as noisily as possible. He calls for her again after a while, and she stomps back to him. We hear them yelling in the room. My brothers and me ignore the episode as best as we can, but we're quietly wishing we were out with our sister at Escalate Park, riding the cheap roller coasters. It looks like it's gonna be another bad night. Then, the rubber band snaps, and Amma sprints right through the house yelling for us to run. Correle! Tiene la pistola! With hardly a second to think about it, we're all scrambling to our feet and dashing after her as we hear pop, pop, pop. I'm the last one out the door, and just as I reach the door, I catch sight of a man I've never seen before in t-shirt and boxers, hair mussed up, glowering like a lucha libre wrestler, and in his hand, one of the guns that he keeps hidden in his closet. As he fires off one more pop, I fling myself out the front door, swearing there's a bullet searing into the small of my back, but it's only fear burning there. Fear and exhilaration that we're out of the house unharmed. I think my mom's almost laughing. She's so scared. In stupefaction, Diana and Joe from next door come out to find us crouched behind their station wagon. The other neighbors from across the street have also decided this escapade is better than Wild Kingdom. A few minutes later, the Chota pull up with no less than 5 cruisers with 5 cops looking at the front door of our chante with their 5 thumbs on the butts of their big black shiny pistols. One officer comes over to get the story from my mom. He has a mustache like my dad's. The door of my house opens a crack and I hear this stranger croak out, "It's over. I put the gun away. You can come back now." Whose voice is that? So broken, so clogged with misery and fatigue. I'm wondering if this is where the police blow him away. This is how these barrio standoffs usually end. The officer with the mustache wants to know if he means to fire his weapon again. My mom shakes her head, but she can't chew the doubt off her fingernails. You can see it too. So he turns to me with a questioning look that shames me to the core. I want to explain to him the deal. I want to jump ahead 20 years for the words to say, maybe it's cause he hasn't slept so good in months. Or maybe this job serving drunks and whores greasy food all night long doesn't pay for shit. Or maybe he's realized at last that he's had 5 kids in 5 years by the time he's 23 with a woman who deserves better than she's getting, and all the manhood dreams he's conceived for his life are over for fucking ever. Because he's caught in a country that won't cut him a break, except maybe to clean the toilets for the next shift. And no last-ditch scramble back across the border is going to raise his prospects in any way. Too late for that. So what if he has a few on the way home? So what if he's tired and surly these days? And so what if he took his gun out of his closet and shot off a couple rounds? He wasn't aiming for us. No way, he said. All the bullet holes are drilled into the floor, like he meant to miss. Like he was only killing off our shadows. Maybe it's his own damn shadow he was really shooting at. Maybe the real crime happened a long time before this, and maybe another one's going to happen as soon as 5 thumbs get the notion. I know these out-of-range words are waiting for me and my father sometime in that more clear-headed day to come. But the present 12-year-old little shit just stands there whimpering like a fool who wants his dad back. The officer nods and walks calmly to the front screen door of my house, and they talk for a while, mustache to mustache. And he turns to his fellow officers and gestures that it's okay, and waves them up over. Timidly to the door she goes, and the 3 of them cluster in private conference until she steps inside. Then the officer walks away, and just like that, the cruisers cruise away, the neighbors return to their homes, my brothers go back in the house for whatever comes after Wild Kingdom, and the tired old sun slumps behind the Franklin Mountains. I'm still standing by the station wagon, wondering what happened to my shadow. Time for one more? And then wow, you need to get me. This one's, I'm going to call it, this is Ben. This is a story about how hard it is to forgive those we hurt. I think I was 10 years old at the time. The story knows, it knows better than I do. Also, before I go on, in that story, Wild Kingdom, you know, I said that there's always some sort of intercession of the divine, some miracle. Just like that, the cop said, make up and go back inside to your husband, and told the other cops, put your guns away, it's over. That doesn't happen anymore. They come blazing away. But it could have gone that way, and it didn't. Because he just sort of said, this is a neighborhood thing, don't worry, it's going to be all right. And it turned out to be all right. Because he understands my family, and families like my family. Anyway, this is Ben. Then there's Ben. Every week the old man comes by the house on his way to somewhere. He knows I'm waiting. Sometimes I'm outside and he sees me and waves from across the street. And the time it takes him to get to me lasts as long as a dream. He's in no hurry. The world inches along with him. I know he has something for me. He always does. Sometimes it's little plastic cowboys with chaps flared and guns drawn, coins with holes in the center from other countries with names I can't pronounce, old Louis L'Amour paperback westerns with the colorful cover illustrations. He even gives me his entire stamp collection. I see his spotted, crinkled fool's cap hands holding this book with stamps from all around the world. And through his wire-rimmed glasses, I see the scuffed gray of his eyes as he drawls, I'm too old to finish it, son. You'll have to do it for me. My mom knows him from the soda fountain at the Gunning Castile drugstore where she works. He comes and has his coffee and sandwich and chats with her. He sits like something out of another time, cross-legged in his baggy khakis with suspenders over a plain cotton shirt. On his head sits a well-worn, wide-brimmed fedora that he never takes off. It's his soft, ruddy, leathery face that draws me in. The face of a man who's seen more good life than I think I ever will. A face that looks like the grandfather of my old black and white fantasy reel. Finally, he's on my porch, smiling, and I say, "Hi, Ben." He nods and says something about the heat and the days counted since the last rain. He even has a little book where he keeps a tally on the dry spell, a remnant from his old rancher days. He asks me to put out my hand, and I do. And on it, he places a hard, red, gourd-like thing. I've never seen anything like it before. "It's a pomegranate," he says. He takes out his knife and pries it open and shows me the embedded seeds like drops of blood in a bowl of wax. I pick a few off the blade, and they're the richest, sweetest nuggets my mouth has ever tasted. Beaming with all the teeth he has left, he says he has a small orchard in his yard full of them. September sun has been good to them. He says, "Come by sometime, son. I'll give you more." Then he's off. Seems like 10 minutes later, I can still see him down the street, shuffling like a patient tortoise on his way to lunch. Where is Borneo? Where's Luxembourg? The stamps in the stamp book seem to come from made-up lands, fantasy places where people like Ben can come and go at will and have adventures that they keep hidden under their fedoras. Does he ride his pony there and chase after bandits and reap his reward in otherworldly fruit? Are these stamps taken from the letters of a lady-love who wanders the world for him? I'm thinking all this one day later that month when 3 of my buddies show up on their bikes and beckon me. I ride off with them like the posse in my Louis L'Amour. One of them says, "I know, let's go get some grenades." "Grenades? What are you talking about?" I ask. "What grenades?" They laugh and tell me to follow them to this place. We ride into an alleyway and park our bikes against the tumbleweeds and clamber over a wall into this lush open garden with grass so green it's almost blue. There's a clump of small trees wide at the base, thick with pomegranates. "Granadas ese," my buddy says with a wink. We yank a bunch of the biggest ones off the low branches and shove them into our pockets and inside our shirts, some of them already bleeding their juice into our hands, and this is how we know we're stealing. Then I hear the slap of a screen door, and we turn tail for the wall and leap over it, giggling and snorting like idiots. I look over my shoulder and see this bald-headed old geezer, shirtless and pale, waving his hands feebly, shouting, "God darn punks! Get out, you! Go on! You're trespassing!" But we're already ripping down the alley on our bikes, dropping loose pomegranates in our wake. Later, we're at the levee by the Rio, digging our faces into the granadas, laughing at our escapade, going over it again and again, embellishing things here and there until it becomes the heroic exploit of our summer. Then I picture again that comical, screaming old man in my head, and I realize it's Ben. Ben of the old fedora and the slow walk and the little gifts. And these are Ben's pomegranates. I feel my face on the inside turning as red as the little seeds in my throat. I feel Borneo and the cowboys of Louis L'Amour slipping away. I feel a hole in my heart as wide as a coin, and then I throw up. The sickly, cloying taste of the pomegranates rises in my gullet, and up they come. All my buddies shriek with laughter and add that one more crazy item to the exploits of the day. I see Ben walking by again, but I won't go out to see him. I won't go and see what new thing he has for me today. He's looking from across the street, hoping to see me step out on the porch and wave, but I won't. I won't do it. He walks on. He wipes his wire-rimmed glasses against his old plaid shirt and walks on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I'd love to like anything in any matter. Yes, sir.
The very first place that I ever saw named Solis was right across from Big Bend National Park.
Mhm.
It's a little village there, and I didn't know that you could dig a hole into the bank of the Rio Grande and evaporative cooling, you could get a nap even in the summer.
Yeah.
That's it, man.
Yeah. See, you start to think about those stories, your own memories from your own past. That's what these retablos are meant to do. They're meant to make you think about your own childhood and your own exploits and your own little mysteries that haunt you, that's so called for you. And those are the moments that defined us, that made us who we are in some way. Because that's when we grow up. And so all of these are kind of almost like rites of passage for me. So, another question? Yes, ma'am.
You call your mother Ama and your father Aha.
Yes.
Is that common in El Paso?
Yes, among Mexican families. I mean, usually it's papa, but sometimes we cut the P and the M off of mama and papa and call it apa and ama. Yeah, it's quite common.
No connection with Arabic or Hebrew?
None. Or in fact, I think in some Asian cultures, they say apa and ama for father and mother. Well, I'm not sure if it's quite like that, but I think it's something like that. I think I've heard
That's
apa.
from Urdu, and that's from the Middle East.
Yeah. But you know what? Why not? I mean, so much of Spanish culture is infused with Moorish culture, and that also came across. You know, I didn't know that what you call a pillow in Spanish is called almohada. And almohada is an Arabic word. Most words in Spanish that start with al, alfombra, and almohada, in other words, are derived from from Arabic. Yes, sir.
Especially the way you read them or perform them, these come across as dramatic monologues. I'm just wondering where the line is, or put another way, whether the subjects or the stories or the forms that you use here appear in your dramatic work. Like the story about Pierre the Maid, for example, is it something that any of these subjects come up in?
Yes, they do. They do. These are now archetypes and mythic figures, like the maid who appears in Lydia, in one of my plays in Lydia. The Border Patrol also is one of those kind of mythic. It's part of that mythic landscape now, and that also has been in my plays. And so has the father. We all have those terrible, scary fathers that are monsters, but inside there's a man, there's a real man. So yeah, I think I've been they've been in my plays for so long that now it's like they're crying out for it to be expressed in a different form and in a more personal form. It's like I can't hide behind my fictions anymore. It's like they're asking, just say it. Just tell us the story.
Can you see them being performed by someone other than yourself?
Well, there's an audiobook that's going to be coming out, but I'm reading the story. I've already recorded it. But there's a company called Word for Word in San Francisco, and they perform short fiction with costumes, lights, all the production values of a set, like a real play, but they do it word for word. Not a single cut is made. All the he said, she said, all the internal monologues, all the descriptive passages, they're all there. And they're performed and spoken. And it works beautifully. They figured out a way to really kind of tell these stories. And they've done stories by Amy Tan, Thomas Wolfe, T. Carragus and Boyle, contemporary authors, as well as authors from the past. And they've got the rights to be able to turn some of my retablos into performances and make it a full-length play. But it's not, it's a play for them, but it's not a play because I don't have to do anything. They're reading the stories completely as they are. So it kind of, I'm relieved because then I don't have to adapt it. And I'm relieved also because I don't have to stand there and find out, like, what did you cut? What did you cut? How did you do this? They don't cut a word. They're done with a great deal of care to make sure that the text is intact. They started out as a group called Book It in Seattle, and then eventually some people splintered off as they moved to the Bay Area, and that became Word for Word. I've directed for them. I directed a story called Slaughterhouse from a novel called Grand Avenue, a collection of short stories compiled in a novel called Grand Avenue. Can't think of the author. Grand Avenue. Can somebody Google it? anyway, but it was fun. It was fun doing that. So that's the progress of Retablo so far. I don't know when the audiobook is expected out. But when I was writing them, I felt like I had to, I'm not trained as a fiction writer at all. So I said, I have to write them in a voice. And it has to be a first-person voice. A me voice. In the same way that a lot of novels are written from that first-person perspective. And I felt like I can do that because it's actually dialogue. It's one huge monologue when you see novels like that. And I felt like that was my entree into it. But because I'm not trained or schooled or studied in short fiction, or any fiction for that matter, I said, this must be my way in. So.
Greg Saris? Right? Greg Saris?
Greg Saris, thank you. Greg Saris. He's a marvelous Native American writer from Santa Rosa. And they made Grand Avenue into the Sundance Channel made it into a miniseries back in the 90s. And I directed Slaughterhouse. Yes, sir.
You said you were blocked when you started writing these stories. Was it because playwriting is harder, or did you find that this broke you open?
Well, what happens at some point is that you get commissioned to do this and to adapt that, or you get certain, theaters have agendas and they want a play about a specific issue, a specific thing they want to address, and they commission the writer, often me, to do it. And I say, that's okay. But, then it starts to feel a lot more like work, and I'm serving my, the greater master, the theater company. And it takes a lot of work to do that. And at some point, I just found that the well was dry. I said, I'm not doing it, who am I doing? I'm doing it for the company. I'm not doing it for me. I'm not writing for me. And I have great envy, I think, of people who are novelists and short story writers who write short fiction and poets, because often they're just writing for themselves and sharing it with the world. And I think that's wonderful when that happens. I have theater companies that will give me that permission, right? Something that's in you, and we'll do it, whatever it is. But often a lot of companies want something quite specific. It's good when I can deliver on that, but sometimes it just got to be so hard at that one point. And late at night, after you've had a little bourbon and it's 11:30, 12 at night, and you're staring at the monitor, you know, I just pulled out a sheet of paper and I wrote it longhand. Longhand. It was not even on the computer, just started writing it longhand. At the end of it, I went, this holds. And I like that impulse that I wasn't serving anyone. I just wrote it because this story wanted to be told. And I said, okay. So then I typed it up and put it in a file. And I think the next one came like a month later. And then another one another month later. And then the time started getting, getting shorter between them. And then when I found out I actually had a book, that I said, oh, this can be a book. I had just moved to Southern Oregon, into the country, and we built a barn and started raising goats and chickens. And I lived prior to that in San Francisco, right in the heart of San Francisco, very urban environment. And I was completely just discombobulated by that. I thought my career was over. I missed my friends. I missed the noise. I missed the buzz. I thought it was done. And I got very depressed. The silence was way too loud. And in the absence of writing a play, I just started writing the rest of these. I wrote like 30 of them in 6 months. They just started coming. But I wasn't writing plays, so I kept telling people, I have writer's block. I have real serious writer's block. I can't write anything. By the way, I have these stories I've been writing, one every other day, one a day, and it's like, you don't have writer's block. You just needed to adjust to where you are. And not only that, the stories were telling me, put your work aside and do us. Serve us. And because if you don't, we're just going to haunt you until you do. And so they came that way. You have to listen to that, to those impulses if you're a writer, or else you do yourself a disservice. Because the muse doesn't often come knocking like that. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, at what age would you say that you moved from kind of a mundane story, inner story life to a archetypal or metaphorical, symbolic landscape? I mean, was there a certain age when all of a sudden you realized that you were just tapping into something really deep and it wasn't just the surfacey stuff?
It was much later in life.
Okay,
It was in memory. When we look back at our places of origin, at our hometowns, the original houses, the original landscape, it's usually, we remember it with great fondness because it's gone. Because it's not there anymore. It can never be there. It can never be the same. So you see it with an added luster, and the colors are more vibrant, and the life is richer than it probably ever was, because that's how we remember it. We have to remember it that way in order to just make it vivid again, to make it present for us. So that's when it starts to take on that kind of mythic kind of quality. And it's also something in us, I think, that as Latinos, we kind of live on that strange border between reality and unreality, between life and death. We navigate those places so easily that things that I think I've dreamt have really happened, and things that I know I dreamt, I almost believe they could be true, that they could have happened. And when the line blurs like that, that's when I feel like, oh, that's Solis territory. That is Solis territory. Like remembering Consuela with that apple. I just, the apple just got even moldier than I remember it. And it became a very, very special, magical moment that was both real and dreamlike, and really bizarre and interesting. But they all speak to me. They're all moments that speak to me and have lessons for me. They were lessons for the skinny brown little shit who was riding his bike back then, but they're lessons for me today. They still talk to me. One of those stories kind of caught me by surprise, and I was there. That's the hard thing about when you. That's what putting it in the present tense does, is it makes it immediate. You say, I do this rather than I did this. That's already one step removed. That's already in the past. But when you write that it's happening and you do this and you step here and you see that, you relive it again. And that's a great thing, a great zone to live in.
Can I ask one more thing? Well, you know, I saw that poetess, Naomi Shihab-Nye,
Yes.
and she was, you know, in the current landscape in our country, you know, she was trying to bring up some like positive things, and she talked about going to a premiere of a movie that was directed by Ethan Hawke called Blaze, I think it was. And somebody, and because they were there, you know, the people that produced it and directed it, they were fielding questions. And somebody was critical of the movie because it went out of sequence. It wasn't chronological, like, you know, the guy's young and then older end, you know. And she said that she heard Ethan Hawke say, the past and the present and the future are always in conversation. And I felt that in your reading. So yeah, I just thought, I was really touched by that quote. And but I did want to ask you about...
Naomi said that?
Naomi was quoting Ethan Hawke
saying that.
Ethan Hawke saying that.
Dude has a greater imagination than I ever gave him credit for.
I know.
That's awesome.
I thought it was a tremendous sentence. But I did want to ask you, like, the difference in your psychic world from desert El Paso to San Francisco, where I don't know where all you've lived, but the desert, you know, 'cause I lived in El Paso for a little while, and I just was amazed by it, you know.
It's a
But,
special place,
yeah.
but I didn't think so. When I went to school, and I went to Trinity where Naomi taught, and knew her just a little bit. But I didn't want to tell anybody where I was from. I didn't want to tell anybody that my father was a short order cook, and that my mother cleaned houses, and that I was first generation American, and that my dad for a time had been an illegal alien. I was too ashamed of that, and I thought, you know, so I didn't even want to think about El Paso, and that lasted for quite a while. Then when I moved to San Francisco, it wasn't until I moved to San Francisco that El Paso came flooding back to me, and I started seeing it very, very clearly. But it was not the El Paso that I remember. It was it was an El Paso of the mind, because I started writing plays that were set there: Santos and Santos, El Paso Blue. I have a number of plays: El Otro, Dreamlandia, Bethlehem. I have a whole slew of works that are about my town. I think of it as my own Yacanapatawpa County, in the same way that Faulkner, you know, created that. It was mine. This was my El Paso, and people would say, El Paso's not like that, and I go, no, but yes, it is. And so, you know, but it only after I moved to San Francisco, because I missed it. It's because then I started to understand how important it was for me. And once I started really painting that picture of El Paso, I started understanding who I was in that context. I really started to understand that.
So did you have plays that were multicast?
Oh yeah, like 12, 13 actors at a time, some with 5, some have music, and some don't. Roxanne had a question.
I did. I was wondering, well, first of all, is that what you said about forgiving those who you hurt just really landed with me. And I'm wondering about this process for you, writing these pieces and then putting them together and sharing them both in publication and with audiences, what that's doing, if it is, healing traumas big and small, sharing of the work, as well as writing, and influencing that movement?
It's been healing, very healing. Because my father changed and became this beautiful man, and he takes care of my wife, my mother, very, very well. Oh, there's a Freudian slip. Is that on camera? I hope not. I hope not. And don't look at me like that. And he's not the same man. But I still regarded him with a lot of hurt, a lot of anger, and that always kept a gulf between us. And then he started changing for me, even though he'd already changed. He started changing for me gradually, that I felt like now